This is the difference between gaining 20 pounds of muscle over a year and gaining 20 pounds of mostly fat while convincing yourself it's muscle. Lean bulking is one of the most misunderstood ideas in fitness, and over the last decade, the research behind it has gotten unusually clear. So today I'm breaking down the calories, the protein, the training, the hormones, the supplements, and the mistakes, all grounded in actual peer-reviewed science. Lean bulking means eating in a small controlled caloric surplus, somewhere around 5 to 20% above your maintenance calories, while following a structured resistance training program. You're trying to maximize muscle growth while keeping fat gain as low as possible, and the target rate of weight gain lands somewhere around 1/4 to 0.5% of your body weight per week. For an 80-kilogram guy, that works out to about 200 to 400 grams per week, or roughly 1 kilo to 1.5 kilos each month. Compare that to the old-school dirty bulk, where you eat everything in sight, run surpluses of 500 or more calories per day, gain over 1% of your body weight weekly, and just accept a pile of fat gain along the way. That whole eat big to get big mentality. And the science has pretty thoroughly torn that approach apart for most people. A 2013 study by Garth and colleagues tracked elite athletes eating in a large surplus versus a moderate one over 8 to 12 weeks. And the large surplus group packed on 15% more fat mass, while the moderate group gained only 3%. The part that matters most is that there was no lean mass advantage from the bigger surplus. They just got fatter. That finding held up a decade later when Dr. Eric Helms and his team published an RCT in Sports Medicine Open in 2023. Comparing maintenance, a 5% surplus, and a 15% surplus in trained lifters over 8 weeks. What they found was that the faster weight gain in the 15% group mostly just increased the rate of fat accumulation, not the rate of muscle growth. 5% produced the same muscle gains with far less fat. All of this points to a practical surplus of about 100 to 300 calories per day for trained lifters, with beginners and hard gainers potentially pushing up to 500. Beyond that range, you're feeding fat cells, not muscle fibers. A fair question comes up here though. If smaller surpluses work better, why not just eat at maintenance and build muscle that way? For some people that actually works, but for most trained lifters, a surplus matters because muscle growth is energetically expensive. Slater and colleagues estimated in 2019 that depositing fat-free mass carries an additional energy cost of roughly 13 to 20 kilojoules per gram of protein on top of the substrate's own energy content. Your body needs that extra fuel to construct new tissue. This connects to a concept called caloric partitioning, sometimes referred to as the P ratio, which describes the fraction of surplus energy that ends up as lean mass versus fat mass. Old theory from Forbes and Hall suggested that leaner people partition more of an overfeed into muscle, but when Eric Trexler ran a meta-regression on resistance training studies, baseline body fat showed only a small relationship with lean gains. Lyle McDonald has estimated that only 15 to 20% of the P ratio responds to diet and training choices, with the rest being largely genetic. Starting leaner gives you a slight edge, but it's not the massive advantage people assume. Protein is where the research has converged more tightly than almost anywhere else in sports nutrition. And the landmark paper comes from Morton and colleagues, published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. That meta-analysis pulled from 49 studies covering over 1,800 participants, and found a clear breakpoint at 1.62 grams per kilogram per day. Above that number, additional protein did not produce additional muscle gain during a surplus. Most evidence-based practitioners have landed on a working range of 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram for off-season hypertrophy, which aligns with the International Society of Sports Nutrition's recommendation of 1.4 to 2.0. During a cut, the number climbs higher, with Helms and colleagues recommending 2.3 to 3.1 grams per kilogram of lean body mass when you're already lean and in a deficit. If you want all of these numbers dialed in for you, my lean bulk program does the math. Link in the description. Distribution across the day turns out to matter quite a bit too. Areta and colleagues tested 80 grams of whey protein, divided into different patterns over 12 hours after resistance training in 2013, and the protocol that produced the highest muscle protein synthesis, beating the alternatives by 31 to 48%, was 4 servings of 20 grams each. That maps to roughly 0.4 grams per kilogram per meal, spread across 3 to 6 meals per day, every 3 to 5 hours. And then there's the leucine threshold. Leucine is the amino acid that directly activates the mTOR pathway, which functions as the molecular switch that initiates muscle protein synthesis. Research from Lane Norton and Donald Lehman established that you need roughly 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine per meal to trigger that switch. Most high-quality protein sources at 25 to 40 grams per serving. Clear that number easily. Once protein is locked in, the rest of your macros follow a pretty clear order of operations. Carbohydrates serve as your primary training fuel, and Iraqi and colleagues recommended at least 3 to 5 grams per kilogram per day in their 2019 review. Carbs replenish muscle glycogen, support training volume, and spare protein from being burned as energy. There's a hormonal angle worth knowing about too, because Whitaker and Harris demonstrated in 2022 that low-carb diets can suppress testosterone in athletes. For fats, the floor matters more than the ceiling. A 2021 meta-analysis by Whitaker and Wu examined what happens when fat intake drops from about 40% to 20% of calories, and what they found was a measurable reduction in total testosterone, free testosterone, and DHT in men, setting a minimum of about 0.5 grams per kilogram per day, or around 20% of total calories, protects your hormonal profile. Meal frequency is the one area where people overthink things the most. A 2020 network meta-analysis covering 22 randomized controlled trials found no body composition differences from eating anywhere between 1 and 8+ meals per day, when total calories stayed the same. Meal frequency barely moves the needle. Protein distribution across those meals is what actually matters. 3 to 6 feedings with roughly equal protein at each covers you. None of the nutrition advice above counts for much without the right training stimulus, and the dose-response relationship between volume and hypertrophy has been mapped out across multiple meta-analyses at this point. Schoenfeld, Ogborn, and Krieger reported in 2017 that each additional weekly set produced about 0.37% more hypertrophy, with conditions exceeding 10 sets per muscle per week, showing a clear advantage. Pelland and colleagues then published the largest meta-regression to date in 2025, covering 67 studies and over 2,000 participants, and they refined that number slightly downward to 0.24% per additional set, with confirmed diminishing returns past a certain point. What both papers agree on is that 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week captures most of the growth stimulus for most people. Rep ranges are actually more flexible than most lifters realize. Schoenfeld's 2017 load comparison showed that hypertrophy comes out roughly equivalent across 5 to 30 reps per set, provided those sets approach failure. Only maximal 1-rep max strength specifically favors heavier loads, which means you have a wide range of rep targets available to you, and the variable that drives results is effort per set, not the specific number on the bar. On the question of training to failure, Ruffalo and colleagues in 2023, along with Robinson and colleagues in 2024, both found that going to true muscular failure offered only trivial hypertrophy advantages over stopping with a few reps left, while adding substantially more fatigue and recovery cost. 0 to 4 reps in reserve captures the stimulus without grinding every set into the ground. Training frequency comes down to logistics more than biology. Each muscle group should get hit at least twice per week, mainly to spread your weekly volume across more sessions. But once volume is equated, frequency itself has a trivial independent effect on growth. Think of it as a scheduling tool, not a growth variable. Not everyone needs a surplus to add muscle, and the research on body recomposition, gaining muscle while losing fat at the same time, has expanded well beyond the old assumption that only total beginners can pull it off. Longland and colleagues ran the defining study in 2016, taking 40 overweight young men and placing them in a 40% calorie deficit with 6 days per week of training. One group consumed 2.4 grams of protein per kilogram, and that high-protein group simultaneously gained 1.2 kilograms of lean mass and lost 4.8 kilograms of fat, all while eating significantly fewer calories than they burned. The clearest candidates for recomposition include untrained beginners, overweight individuals who carry abundant stored energy, previously trained lifters returning after time off thanks to retained myonuclei, which is the cellular basis of muscle memory, and anyone who's been training with suboptimal nutrition or programming up to that point. But here's where the limits show up. For lean, well-trained intermediate and advanced lifters, recomposition slows to a crawl. Alternating between small surplus phases and short deficit phases produces faster total progress at that stage, which is exactly where lean bulking becomes the better strategy once you've already used up those beginner advantages. Let me save you some money and lay this out directly based on what the evidence actually supports. Creatine monohydrate stands alone at the top. The ISSN position stand calls it the most effective ergogenic supplement currently available, and a meta-analysis found it produces about 1.37 kilograms of additional lean mass versus placebo, along with 5 to 15% improvements in maximal strength and power. The dose is 3 to 5 grams per day. Loading is optional, and studies tracking intake of up to 30 grams per day for 5 years showed no adverse effects. Protein powder earns its place purely through convenience. Morton's meta-analysis showed protein supplementation adds about 0.30 kilograms of fat-free mass and 2.49 kilograms to your 1-rep max, but any protein source achieving the same daily total would produce the same outcome. Caffeine at 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram has real but modest effects on strength and endurance, and beta-alanine improves performance in efforts lasting 1 to 4 minutes. Strong evidence essentially stops there. Citrulline malate, HMB, ashwagandha, all of these range from small effects to overhyped claims. Your money goes further spent on food quality, a gym membership, and creatine before touching anything else on that list. Everything above distills into a protocol you can actually follow, starting this week. Establish your maintenance calories first. The Mifflin-St. Jean equation gives you a starting estimate, but the most reliable method involves tracking your food and weight for 2 to 3 weeks until you find the intake where your weight holds steady, because activity multipliers can swing 15 to 30% between individuals, and real-world tracking beats any online calculator. From that baseline, add 5 to 15%, which typically means 100 to 300 extra calories for trained lifters and up to 500 for beginners. Set protein at 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram. Set fat at a minimum of 0.5 grams per kilogram or 20% of total calories, and fill everything remaining with carbs, aiming for at least 3 to 5 grams per kilogram. Train each muscle at least twice per week with 10 to 20 total sets per muscle group. Use a mix of rep ranges from 5 to 30. Take most sets to 0 to 4 reps in reserve, and build in progressive overload by adding weight, reps, or sets over time. Daily weigh-ins averaged across the week give you your tracking metric. 1/4 to 0.5% body weight gain per week is the target, with monthly progress photos rounding out the picture. Once body fat climbs above roughly 15 to 18% for men or 25 to 28% for women, or performance starts dropping, that signals a transition into a mini cut of 3 to 6 weeks at a moderate deficit, with elevated protein, resetting body fat, without abandoning the muscle building phase entirely. Nearly every dramatic claim in popular bulking content, the narrow anabolic windows, insulin spikes driving growth, 6 meals a day being mandatory, more volume always producing better results, dirty bulks building more muscle, has been weakened or outright falsified by the last 10 years of research. What keeps accumulating evidence over and over is the stuff nobody wants to hear. Sufficient daily protein, a modest surplus, progressive overload, enough training volume executed with real effort, adequate sleep, and patience measured in years instead of weeks. The science of lean bulking has settled to an unusual degree, and the best part is that the answer was never complicated. It's just consistent. Ready to stop overthinking and start building? My Lean Bulk program lays it all out. Grab it in the description. I'll see you in the next one.